Hello, my little mathematicians. Today we're going to focus on writing and graphing equations. If you could please write this and this down in the center of your paper. So go ahead and pause the video and copy this down and then unpause it once you have it. Okay, so when we're trying to go, they give you the graph and you need to create the table. Fill in this table with points from the graph. Then find the pattern. What do you do to X each time to get Y? Okay, that's what you're going to think to yourself. Then you use that pattern to make an equation, and then you just connect the points to make a line. Okay, so that's how you go from a graph to an equation. Fill in the table with the points, look for the pattern, and then use the pattern to make an equation. If they give you the equation and then you need to do the graph, okay, you pick points to plug in for your X. Then you follow the equation to find each corresponding Y. So you're going to plug in points for X to find the Y. Then you plot those points, connect the points to make a line. Okay, and that's all there is to it. Again, if you need to pause the video to copy those steps down, I strongly suggest it. Okay, and then now you unpause the video, you're back with us. Let's go ahead and follow those steps. Okay, so for the first example, do you see that they gave me those coordinate points on the graph? So let's go ahead and fill in the table with those. So the very first point that I see is right here. What is that? It goes over 2, but up what? Well, between 0 and 20, what's halfway between there? 10. So that means that on my graph, they're counting by 10. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. All right. You can count in case it's not labeled and you have to graph points, just FYI. You can choose whatever you want to count by for the Y or X axis. So notice how here I counted by ones, right? And then I just labeled every 2, but I'm still counting by ones for each line. And then here you're counting by 10s for each line and you labeled every 20. You stayed consistent, okay? You can count by different things on each axis, but within each axis, you stay consistent. We always counted by 10s and labeled every 20. We always counted by 1 and labeled every 2, okay? So now with that being said, we went over 2, up 10 for that first point right here. Now what's this point that they graphed? That went over 4 and up 20. This point went over 6 and up 30. This one went over how much? Hopefully you said 8, and up how much? Hopefully you said 40. And then their next point was over 10, up 50. Okay, so I filled in the table with the points from my graph. Now I want to find the pattern. What did I do each time to this X to get this Y? Well, they're getting bigger. So did I add or multiply? Well, if I add, 2 plus 8 is 10. But is 4 plus 8 20? Okay, so maybe they multiplied. What would you multiply 2 by to get 10? You'd multiply by 5. So do 4 times 5, and 6 times 5, and 8 times 5, and 10 times 5. Well, 2 times 5 is 10. 4 times 5 is 20. 6 times 5 is 30. 8 times 5 is 40, and 10 times 5 is 50. That means that each time you took the X and multiplied by 5 in order to get your Y. When we write the equation, we always want it to be Y equals whatever it is you're doing to X, okay? So see if you can do this one, okay? So you paused the video, and now you came back. So what are they counting by on this axis? Well, between 0 and 2 is 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, now let's go ahead and fill in my table. This point went over 1, up 4. This point went over 2, up 5. This one went over 3, up 6. And over 4, up 7, and over 5, up 8. Notice that they move at a consistent pattern because both of these, if I were to connect these points here and on this graph as well, they make perfectly straight lines because they're linear equations. They're going to move at a constant rate. So let's find what that constant rate is. What's the equation that I always get? Well, they're getting bigger. So if I multiply by 4, 1 times 4 is 4, but 2 times 4 isn't 5. So let's try adding. Well, 1 plus 3 is 4. Let's try adding 3 every single time and see if that pattern holds up. Well, 2 plus 3 is 5. 3 plus 3 is 6. 4 plus 3 is 7. And 5 plus 3 is 8. That pattern held the whole time. So I know that the equation is you take x and you add 3. Okay? Just a side note, totally side note, but the number in front of x is your rate, how much it goes up from point to point to point. So the change in y over the change in x, that went up 1, up by 1. So 1 over 1 is just 1. So it had a rate of 1, which the number in front of x is 1. Here it had a rate of, well, what's the change in x? That went up 10, and that went up 2. So 10 over 2 gives me 5. So it had a rate of 5. Hey, look, that's what was in front of x. So your rate is the change in y over the change in x. That'll come later, but just so you can see the pattern. And then there's nothing at the end because I started at 0, 0, right? It started at 0 on the y-axis. But here, this one has something tacked on at the end because did I start at 0? No, I started at 3 on the y-axis. And look, that's what's there. So just in case, like there's so many points that you can check in on yourself here. Okay, how much it goes up from point to point. The change in y over change in x is always going to go in front of your x. That's the constant rate of change. From point to point, it went up 1, right, from 4 to 5, and over 1, from 1 to 2. This one went up how much from point to point? It went up 10 over 2, because from 20 to 30 is 10. From 4 to 6 is 2. Well, 10 over 2 reduces to 5. And then that number at the end tells you where you start. Now that's coming later. I was just kind of previewing some of the stuff that they're going to expect from you next year. But isn't that nifty? Okay. Our other thing is what if they give me the equation and I need to complete a table and a graph? Well, the first thing is I need to pick points to plug in for my x. So maybe let's pick 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, now what do I do with those? I'm going to multiply 8 times 0. What is 0 times 8, and 1 times 8, and 2 times 8, and 3 times 8, and 4 times 8? Because I'm taking each of these x's and I'm substituting it into my equation for x in order to find the corresponding y. So if I just take each of these x's and multiply it by 8, that's plugging it into my equation. So 0 times 8 is 0. 1 times 8 is 8. 2 times 8 is 16. 3 times 8 is 24. And 4 times 8 is 32. All right. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and plot those points. So I want to figure out what I'm counting by over here. So halfway between 0 and 16 is 8. Halfway between 16 and 32 is 24. Because each time you're counting by 8s, right? So 1 times 8, 2 times 8, 3 times 8, 4 times 8, 5 times 8, 6 times 8, 7 times 8, and 8 times 8. Because I'm counting by 8s each time I move up. And how I found that is I went halfway between 0 and 16 is 8, and that told me what I'm counting by. Now I can complete the rest of my graph. So it starts at 0, 0, then it goes over 1, up 8, then over 2, up 16, then over 3 up 24, then over 4 up 32. Okay, so I have all of those points from my table, and now I connect them and they make a perfectly straight line. If when you go to connect them, they don't make a perfectly straight line, you know you did something wrong. Okay, now for this one, I'm going to plug in numbers for x. You would think like, okay, 0, 1, 2, but if I plug in 0, I have 0 minus 3. That's a little bit tricky. So why not start with 3? Because 3 minus 3 I can do, that's 0. And then 4 minus 3 is 1. Or I could use the numbers down here that they already have. So let's do 6, 9, and 12 on the x-axis. So 6 minus 3 is 3. 9 minus 3 is 6. And 12 minus 3 is 9. Okay, let's go ahead and graph those. First off, I want to kind of fill in the in-between numbers. So halfway between 0 and 4 is 2, which means this is counting by 2s. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. This one is then counting by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, etc. So I'm going to go over 3 up nothing. I'm going to go over 4 up 1. That's 2. So 1 would be halfway between the 0 and the 2. Over 6 up 3. That's between 2 and 4. And then over 9 up 6 would be right there. And over 12 up 9 would be halfway between the 8 and the 10, so right there. And that's how you connect your line. Now, some of you are like, wait a minute. So your equations before, you were talking about how, this number at the end tells me where I start on the x-axis. So I started at 3 on the x-axis. Here I started at 0. Here, there's nothing tacked on at the end, so I started at 0. What about this one? Like, where do I start? Well, notice if I extend this line, it would hit down here at -3. And that's what's here. And then your rate, each time you go up 1, it went, each time you went up 1, it went over 1. Just something to keep in mind as you do these. But now you know how to go from if they give you a graph to an equation, or if they give you an equation to a graph. Congratulations, my little mathematicians.